Good morning. Happy Sunday. Look at this. We get to be together. Isn't this cool? Yeah, it's a privilege. In some areas of the world, Christians can't gather like this, but we can. And that's an awesome privilege, right? Hey, we often say at this church that the most important thing that happens in the room is what you choose to do with it outside the room, like choosing work. It was so fun. Last Sunday, at the end of the day, I got this email from someone. He was kind of applying for a new position in his company as a manager and had to do a presentation. He retold his presentation based on what happened in service last week. It was just like so immediate for him what God wanted him to do. That he took the good that he got out of the message and he put it right into action. It was a coffee video and some other insights and used that to interview. That's what we're about. We're about faith acting out in the world around us so people can see Jesus is alive in our lives. Isn't that cool? I think it is, right? Thank you, Pete. I appreciate it. I don't know. I got to ask him. I think it was a little early to figure that piece out. There were a couple of people, but I prayed for him. So there's a little boost, right? All right. So, hey, ever notice that in life, family and business, two nice concepts that don't always work well together, right? Does anyone anyone around here eat cereal? Like maybe in the breakfast or you have that little guilty binge at the end of the night, right? You've been good all day long and then you're breaking open the Lucky Charms or something, right? Tricks, not just for kids. Kellogg is an amazing company. Did you know that John Harvey Kellogg, a doctor out of the Seventh-day Adventist movement, actually is the founder of Kellogg's? He was a doctor at that time who wanted to make a difference in the eating habits of Americans and to improve their health. Because breakfast was really bad back then, and this was a boost up from that, okay? I'm just saying. He hired his brother, William Keith Kellogg, to work alongside him. The doctor worked his brother at 150 hours a week without a day off. Strong religious convictions, but worked his brother. His brother not only ran the factories, had to polish his shoes and manage all of his correspondence. The Kellogg cereal began to really take off because they were using it in basically the equivalent of a residential medical clinic to help people get healthy. The younger brother saw an opportunity, Will did, to create a business. The doctor wanted nothing to do with gaining riches off of doing altruistic work. So finally, after a long series of arguments and months that passed by, Will just talked his older brother into releasing the rights to do cornflakes and went off and built an amazing business. Started to become really rich. Well, the doctor saw this happening, needed some money for his own company. He created his own version of Kellogg's cornflakes. So on the shelf from two different companies were Kellogg's cornflakes. Well, the younger brother just lost it. Sued the older brother for using the family name to make cereal. Can you imagine being the judge in court, having two brothers suing each other over their family name for a business they both created, and having to make a judgment on that? The younger brother won. Business and family don't always mix well together. Sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes it's really hard just to even just live your own life out, whether it's at church, whether it's at home, or whether it's at the business, your workplace. Bringing those three worlds together can be really hard. You can be a family of two brothers with strong religious convictions trying to do good in the world who just can't get along and have to resolve an argument in court. So what I want to talk about this morning is how do we weave these three worlds in together so they're a little bit more consistent. We're going to talk about this morning. I'm talking about one of the most successful people in the Bible who was a really lousy parent. You want to look at that? I'm going to explain why I've been wearing a bracelet for this series. And then I want to give us an exercise to help us maybe listen to God this morning and hear something for your life that's going to change the way you live your life outside this room like it did for the gentleman last week. To do that, I want to pray. God, I just love being here. I get to talk on your behalf. And I feel you fill me and just move into the room. I really believe you've already been here this morning. And that you continue in this moment to fill the space because you love everyone who is in this room with a deep, never-ending love. So God, touch us in a way that we might experience that love. Speak to us about home and work and faith. And God, I know your heart's desire is that we would be one person in all places. So please be present this morning in a way we don't expect, but in a way that will change us forever. I know that does happen, Jesus, and I love you. It's yours, Father. Amen. Hey, last week we talked about David. He was an individual from the Bible. We talked about his career as a shepherd and how it influenced his life. He's got a great reputation in some ways in the Bible. This is written about David. David, their king. God testified concerning him, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. Man, isn't that awesome? Who doesn't want to know God would say that about them? He'll do everything I want him to do. We first met David as a shepherd last week. And then the next time we encounter David in the Bible, he's just still a young man, probably a teenager, on the field of battle, the only person willing to confront a giant of a warrior. And with his training as a shepherd, a sling and a rock, he kills the warrior and makes a decisive military victory for Israel. The king brings David into his employ. David is a gifted musician. He's the king's private musician. He almost has like a calming effect on the king in the way that he plays music. He also continues his career as a soldier and starts to just begin to mount military victories. As he mounts them so quickly, he becomes a commander of many other soldiers. Literally in the Bible is a chant that's recorded that the population around used to sing about David. It wasn't really good because they weren't singing chants like that about the king. Matter of fact, they were comparing the king and David David was the one coming out on top, which led to jealousy. So the king began to grow in anger towards David to the point that he tried to take David's life. So David fled, left the country into exile, ran into the wilderness for his own life. But his character and his victories were such that people followed him. And he grew this ragtag team of people, some brigands and some soldiers and people that just believed in him and saw God's hand on his life, and they really wanted to follow after David. And so David grew this mighty army, and he turned this undisciplined group of warriors into an actual army and began to do good for Israel, even in exile. He grew some tensions with the king, made some really good decisions about not killing the king when he had opportunities to do that, and just began to bide his time to a place where Saul was killed in battle. There was a vacuum of leadership, and David just naturally stepped in. And as he stepped in, he brought healing to the nation. He began to bring this young nation back into solidarity. They grew on a national level to be their equivalent of a minor superpower in the area. They had this growth of wealth and economy. The politics all came together. The military became strong, and David became famous for it. David actually is credited for writing most of a book that we call Psalms. These wonderful poems. Some of them were songs that have these deep reflections on the character of God, God's work in the world, human nature, how we can connect with God. His faith is an inspiration to us to this day. He was an amazing guy. He became the gold standard of kings. When you read the history of kings in what we call the Old Testament, everything written before Jesus, is often, when it comes at least to this section of Israel, they would often say that either he was a good king like his father David, or he was not a good king unlike his father David. And his reputation was stellar for his career, which was really cool. Except he was a horrible man at home. He just had a horrible home life. David was the type of guy that had strong passions. Instead of leading his military into battle at one stage in his life, he stayed back at home. He became attracted to a married woman, drew her into his home, seduced her. She became pregnant. David orchestrated the affairs so that to try to hide the pregnancy, he had her husband killed in battle. And he tried to suppress the whole thing and just move on. But you can't hide anything from God. It's like trying to keep it off of social media, but on a divine level. And it just went off everywhere what had happened. And David had lived with disgrace that he'd gotten this woman pregnant, but married her and tried to do his best at repairing that. He just wasn't a guy that was attentive at home. He had multiple wives, which means he had a host of children. Some of them were they were connected through David, but not through their mom. Like a man named Ammon. Ammon was this guy who also had dad's strong passions and became intensely attracted to one of his half-sisters, Tamar. He orchestrated a moment to have Tamar in his bedroom, and he raped his sister. It's a horrific scene in the Bible. It's a heartbreak moment. David hears about it, is infuriated, and does nothing. Tamar is just in disgrace. She runs to her biological brother Absalom, and she finds solace by moving in with Absalom's family and lives her life, the Bible says, with disgrace from that moment on. No justice for this action. Well, this kind of brews inside of Absalom. He's the oldest brother, next to be king. And Absalom, a few years go by, and he's just been kind of biding his time, and he decides to host a party. He invites David to come. David doesn't go to his son's party, where all the other kids are going to be. Doesn't have time for it. Well, in the midst of this party, Absalom pulls a moment where he actually kills Ammon in justice for Tamar's rape. So now there's chaos in the household. Absalom runs and he runs out and he finds refuge in his mother's father's home, who also is a king, in another palace, and creates tension between these two nations now. And years go by again. David does nothing about this situation. It was an intermediary, a friend, who got them communicating again. So finally, David said it was okay for Absalom to come back, but Absalom couldn't move into the family palace. Absalom had to live far away. Well, how is that healing? How is that restorative? Where's the justice in any of that? Absalom is so frustrated, so neglected by his dad, just wants to get back into a repair for the family. Honestly, he lights a field on fire to get attention. That's how desperate he is. And so through that action, another intermediary brings them back together. Absalom comes back in the house, and there's an emotional moment of repair, of forgiveness, and when things look like they're going to go okay, until Absalom, I think, is so disillusioned with his father that he starts to build his own career. He has dad's looks. He has dad's charm with people. He begins to build a following of his own underneath his dad's household, until he pulls off a military coup and dad runs into exile, followed. The nation is divided into civil war. Soldiers die. Chaos reigns. David flees for his life. And when it all comes back together and the dust is settled, Absalom is dead and David's family life is a wreck. It's hard to see where his life goes after that. His last crowning achievement is to assemble all the resources that they would need to build the temple. But God won't allow David to build the temple. There's just too much blood on his hands. In an act of grace, he allows the son that came out of the affair with Bathsheba, the second child they have, to become king, a man named Solomon. And David becomes an incredible example of how you can be stunning in your career and lousy in your home life and have a faith in between, right? So I just want to talk for a moment because it's really hard, isn't it? I mean, sometimes we can be a person at work where our faith just integrates into the work and people call us the religious person, right? And maybe they tease you a little bit, but at the other side, they may come to you for advice or they secretly admire you for your character and your conviction. Or you could be that person when they find out you go to church, they go, "You? Really? Never would think you'd be a church person. You never took me to be religious. I mean, you never even talk about church or any of that stuff. I'm surprised." Or, you know, maybe at home, your faith integrates into home and you're a spiritual leader at home. You really try to demonstrate character. You try to build it into your kids and you talk about it with your friends. And if you're married and your spouse, you got a good relationship like that. And so going to church is a fun thing and everything just kind of weaves itself together. Or maybe your kids know that we act one way at church and another way at home. Maybe your neighbors or friends don't even know that you go to church. Right? Your house doesn't reflect those values. Or if you got a couple of signs or wall art up, it's a little bit like, huh? Because there's a disconnect for people. How do we weave together a consistency so that work, home, and faith are all connected? That's what I want to spend some time talking about. Because I think in order to do that, it requires three things. It requires dedication, it requires reflection, and it requires support. I want to talk about that. We need to be dedicated to be the same person in all environments. In order to live this life of consistency, we have to be dedicated to living out our faith. We're going to look a bit at this letter that was written by Paul to one of the churches of his day, because everybody struggles with this, all the way back to the very beginning. And here's some pastor's counsel to a church he was writing, and we're going to take this apart this morning. Paul writes, "That's not the way you learned Christ. assuming that you heard about him and were taught in him as the truth is in Jesus, to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds. To put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Here's what Paul is saying. Put off the old way and put on the new way. He's using a metaphor of changing your clothes. I was listening to a podcast. Some of you may remember the name Jimmy Garoppolo. He was a backup quarterback for the Patriots. And Jimmy talks about in this interview, he's like, he goes, one day I'm a Patriot. I went to take a nap. I woke up and suddenly I was a 49er. He's like, just like that. He goes, my phone had been blown up. There's 100 texts. And he goes, and I realized I was no longer a New England Patriot. I got on a plane that night. The next morning, I'm on a practice field, and forever on, I'm wearing a San Francisco 49ers jersey. You wouldn't expect Jimmy Garoppolo to show up on the field with a Patriots jersey. You wouldn't expect that when the game starts, he has the Patriots jersey on. You just know he's part of a new team. And he just put aside one team, and he took on the other team. And that's, in a sense, what Paul is saying. You have left behind the old team. Now you need to wear the garments of the new team. People need to know who you are, identify who you are in public, so that your character and your faith are evident in everything. And that requires dedication. It's like this. So I'm actually wearing this bracelet because of a story that somebody told me. I'm going to read you the story as they wrote it. Maybe 5 years ago, during a trip to an amusement park next to the popcorn and churros cart, I came across a kiosk selling leather knickknacks. A bracelet caught my eye. It was a leather band made of 3 interwoven leather bands, and I liked it. It was cheap, so I bought it. I wore it the rest of the day, and I wore it some days back at home, and occasionally, it's casual wear. It was on my wrist one day, a day when I was grappling with a difficult truth, and I realized, due to the circumstances and events I won't get into, that I was behaving differently in different environments, but not in a good way. I presented one face at work, a different face at church, and a different face at home. It was almost like one person at work, a different person at church, and a different person at home. I wasn't proud of this. I thought of a friend who I admired, and I knew him at work, in church, as well personally. And one thing I most admired about him was that in each context, he was the same person. You knew what you were getting. He was authentic, genuine, trustworthy, true, honest. He was him. So I made a decision to try my best to do that and to try to be my best self in every context, at home, at church, and work. 3 facets, one person. I looked down at my wrist and I saw my cheap leather bracelet. 3 interwoven strands, one band, and it clicked. The bracelet was a perfect match for what I was thinking. And so now I wear the bracelet everywhere to continually remind myself to try to be my best self, home, work, church, everywhere. Isn't it remarkable how you can transform simple little symbols into a spiritual inspiration? So I tried it. I got the bracelet online, and mine has 3 strands, one for home, one for church, and one for work. And you can say, well, you work at church. Yeah, but once you're on a staff at a church, Monday through Saturday isn't necessarily a lot different. You have the same struggles that you face in a business context with making decisions and controlling your temper and watching your tongue and interacting with other people. But there's a 4th strand that weaves all 3 together. It's been remarkable how it bumps against my watch, or it'll clack on my keyboard, or I'll just feel it jingling as I walk along. And it becomes this sort of like spiritual motivation of just trying to weave together consistency. Because these symbols matter to us. It's why we wear a wedding band, to show the world we're dedicated to someone. Or it's like keeping a little business card nearby as a symbol of devotion during the week. What happened on Sunday morning, the most important thing is what I did with it during the week outside the room. And keeping these things woven in together. It requires the discipline of reflecting on the Bible thoughtfully. I mean, we talk a lot about engaging the Bible at our church. We engage the Bible at our church because we really believe that there's an inspiration in the Bible that cannot be found in any other book in the world. That God speaks to it in a way that is unique. in the way that he had influenced the authors. That's a lot to unpack. This is why a faith group like Starting Point is a great place to go to help you be able to experience that. And there are stories in history of people whose lives have been changed just by reading the Bible. So we really encourage people to kind of dive into it on a daily basis. I do. And I find God speaking to my life in remarkable ways. If we're to move a little bit further on this very same letter that Paul's taking, he goes from this idea of like, be the same person, right? You got the new uniform, live with the new team. And then he starts going into these incredibly specific actions in life that help you live it out. And it's remarkable how something written 2,000 years ago is so applicable to today. He writes, stop telling lies. Let us tell our neighbors the truth so we're all parts of the same body. You know, it's like that scene when you're doing a service call at someone's home and they look at you and they say the words, do I really need to do this? Now what are you going to say? Or you're rushing home and your spouse says, you know, you stayed late, you did a bunch of work, and then you came home, and then your spouse is there going, did you forget that we're supposed to have a teacher's meeting tonight? Look at how late you are. Did you forget the meeting? What are you going to say? Or what about this? Be angry. Do not sin. Do not let the sun go down in your anger and give an opportunity to the devil. Your partner blew the presentation because he just wasn't prepared. It was an irresponsible act. And you just feel like the whole thing was a shambles. You feel the heat rising up inside of you, and he looks at you walking down the meeting and goes, hey, I thought that went pretty well. What about you? What are you going to do? You're working at home. You got a project. You just got to get it done. The kids are acting wild. Run through the house. Hit the table. Coffee goes boom all over the keyboard. Now what are you going to do? How does faith weave itself into that? Or this. If you're a thief, quit stealing. Instead, use your hands for good, hard work and then give generously to others in need. Your boss walks in. You're the account manager. He's like, hey, I've opened up this new account for us. It's an offshore account, and we just need to move some numbers around. So I want to get together with you this afternoon, and let's talk about how we can make these numbers work. Now what are you going to do? You put aside or you're at home, you put aside the whole weekend for football. And then you get a text from a friend, and the friend's like, hey, dude, can you help me move today? Now what are you going to do? How does faith begin? See these practical steps of the way faith just begins to penetrate every area of our life. And in reading the Bible and just kind of like meditating on letting God speak to us, he begins to address these practical situations in our life. How about this one? Let there be no sexual immorality, impurity, or greed among you. Such sins have no place among God's people. You know that relationship where you just felt like casual flirting, it was innocent, and then the coworker starts referring to you as their workplace spouse, and now the touch becomes familiar, a little too familiar. Or you're at home. It's late at night, no one else is up. What are you going to watch on TV? Or how about this? Here's one more. Obscene jokes, foolish talk, coarse jokes. These are not for you. Instead, let there be thankfulness to God. You know, on the site, it's like F-bombs are adjectives, and dirty jokes are just part of the conversation. What's starting to come out of your mouth? Or it's the barbecue, and the neighbors feel like your coworkers with the things that are coming out of their mouth that they're saying. And now you're staying there together, and you've got the beer and the barbecue, and what's going to come out of your mouth now? All these things begin to penetrate our lives as God begins to work in us by reading the Bible and speaking to us, bringing a consistency to our lives in all the areas of what we live. It's incredible how practical it is. Are you going to lie? You're going to tell the truth. You're going to blow your top. You're going to control your anger. You're going to steal. You're going to work hard. You're going to guard your mouth. You're going to let it fly. You're going to be faithful, or you're going to compromise. Just by reading the Bible. Let's practice this morning. There's a term for it in the Christian world. We call it a devotion, a quiet time with God in the morning, or sometimes in the evening. And people listen to the Bible on the way to work, or they'll read it to put aside some time, maybe at lunch or before they go to bed. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to read you the full passage that I've been pulling these little verses out of. Take this card. Please just hold it in your hands. Make your pastor happy by pretending to cooperate. How's that? And just hold it in your hand. You can read along with me. You can download the Bible app, right? The Bible app is free. It's the one that we often encourage people to use. If you don't know how to do that, the Hub will help you, or you can get, if you want I think they still make actual Bibles made out of paper, right, Jim? Yeah, they do. I think we have some at the Hub. You can pick one up there. But I'm just going to read this passage, and here's what I want you to do. While you're holding the card, listen. Something's going to spark a thought in your mind about home or work. That's God speaking to you. Jot something down on the card that will jog your memory later in the week. Okay? So here, let me just read this. God, I want to thank you for being in the room. I want to pray that you speak to our lives in such a clear way we know what you want us to do outside this room. Amen. So listen for God to speak and maybe jot something down on this card that would be helpful. So stop telling lies. Let us tell our neighbors the truth, for we're all part of the same body. And don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, for anger gives a foothold to the devil. If you're a thief, quit stealing. Instead, use your hands for good hard work and then give generously to others in need. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. And don't bring sorrow to God's Holy Spirit by the way you live. Remember, He's identified you as your own, guaranteeing that you will be saved on the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God, through Christ, has forgiven you. Imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you're His dear children. Live a life filled with love, following the example of Jesus. He loved us, offered Himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. Let there be no sexual immorality, impurity, or greed among you. Such sins have no place among God's people. Obscene stories, foolish talk, coarse jokes, these aren't for you. Instead, let there be thankfulness to God. You can be sure that no immoral, impure, or greedy person will inherit the kingdom of Christ and of God. For a greedy person is an idolater, worshiping the things of this world. Don't be fooled by those who try to excuse these sins, for the anger of God will fall on all who disobey Him. Don't participate in the things these people do, for once you were filled with darkness, you were on the other team. Now you have light from the Lord. You're on a new team. So live as people of light. For this light within you produces only what is good and right and true. What did God say to you this morning? That thought that came into your mind when I read that passage, it felt like a little ooh in the inside. That's God coming alongside you saying, come on, let's be the same person. Because it takes devotion, dedication, right? It takes reflection, and it takes support. We talk a lot about faith groups. Jason did an excellent job, so I'm not going to dive a lot into that, but I'm just saying that the people who engage in a faith group, they find help. As long as the people in the faith group are honest with one another and transparent with one another and will listen to each other, they find a help at home and at work to be consistent in their life across the board. Because isn't consistency what we want? Think of the words you use for a person who is inconsistent, who is one person at church and a completely different person at home or work. Would you call that a hypocrite? But the people you know who are consistent at church and at home or work, you know what the word is we use for them? Admirable. Admirable. So God, help us to be admirable. Help us to be people that others would admire, and in doing so, admire Jesus, our inspiration, whom we follow. God, would you convict us in such a way that the experience of our life and our day would just fill with your Holy Spirit, and we would be the same person in the building and out of the building, one who brings honor to your name, one whose touch in the lives of other people is good, drawing them to a deeper relationship with Christ and a greater love for others. God, we just love you and trust you with this moment.